5 NHS nurses. Bethany Hutchison, Lisa Lockie, Anise Grundy, Tracy Hooper and Joanne Bradbury, dubbed the Darlington 5. You'll have heard about them before. They basically complained at their local hospital that they felt a bit uncomfortable about being in a changing room with a fellow nurse who is literally a fellow, a trans woman, as claimed, i.e. a biological male, also changing in the changing rooms with them. And they basically said, we'd like him not to be there. They reported that vulnerable women, including those with past trauma and also with certain religious cultural beliefs, were uncomfortable about undressing around men, not unreasonably. Well, they brought a legal case in June alleging sexual harassment against their employer, County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust. And guess what? They've been forced out of their changing rooms. They've been given another little locker room with just a chair and one hook as where they all have to change, leaving their clothes on the floor, despite the fact they're working as nurses. Not entirely sure that is particularly a good medical practice for them to be wearing clothes from the floor. But they've basically been told, well, you're not welcome in the changing room for the women, but the man is. Let's talk about this with Amy Gallagher, who's a former NHS nurse herself and a commentator at the New Culture Forum. Amy, so being a woman and saying, I'd rather not have men in a women's changing room, means that you get ousted from the changing room and the man is allowed in. The world is topsy-turvy, is it not?
Yeah, this is an unbelievable story because we know in April of this year, the NHS constitution was changed to include that sex would be seen as a biological fact. And actually it was brought in that, for example, a trans woman wouldn't be allowed, a trans woman patient wouldn't be allowed on a female ward. So that
because he's a man.
Yeah, so that patients would be able to have single-sex spaces. And I would have thought surely that would apply also to staff, like it would make sense that it would do. But obviously that isn't the case, and things like this are still happening. And what's remarkable about this is that the changes that were made were that all the female nurses, which is probably going to be most nurses, because most nurses are female, were moved into a small, lesser furnished room, while the trans woman, the man, got to stay in the more appropriate changing room. So I don't understand why it is that the females have to change their behaviour and they have to be given an inappropriate room, and the man gets to stay in the nice room. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it does make sense because we know that in lots of organisations, particularly public institutions like the NHS, basically trans rights trample on women's rights. They do so again and again and again. And it's only when women stand up this actually comes to the fore. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous that women are being forced to change in front of men. There's a reason why women were given single-sex spaces. It was because there are most men, perfectly normal guys, who, by the way, don't want to change in the same room as women because they know it would make them uncomfortable, it would make the women uncomfortable. That's why they're perfectly happy to have those single-sex spaces. But some men are predatory. And I'm afraid, looking at the incidence of crime against women by so-called trans women, it would appear a lot of them people who are pretending to be trans women are predatory men who are seeking access to women's safe spaces for the very reason that they want to see women undressed. And I'm sorry, it's a reality. Now, not casting aspersions on anyone who, in my view, wrongly believes they're born in the wrong body, but genuinely believes that. That's very different. But there's a reason why we don't let the nice men use our changing rooms or our toilets, as opposed to the bad men, is that we don't know which is which. But we know that pretty much all violence against women is perpetrated by men. And that all sex crimes pretty much are perpetrated by men. And that's why we keep them out. It's quite bizarre that the NHS doesn't know this.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I mean, it should be said that this male nurse who's using this female changing room, who says he's transgender, he hasn't gone for any gender reassignment surgery. He's actually in a relationship with a woman. So he's essentially a heterosexual man.
I think he probably thinks he's a lesbian.
Well, possibly, but he's just declared himself to be a woman. Yeah. And that's all that's needed. And on this ward, their policy states that they are basing their spaces on gender self-ID. So you can just declare yourself to be a woman or be a man and then enter the opposite sex changing rooms. So even though these nurses have now got a new room that's not particularly nice, but they have been...
It's a tiny little room with not enough lockers, a chair and a hook.
Yeah, but theoretically, this male nurse could still enter that room anyway.
Yeah.
So you could have loads of rooms, and the
Yeah.
women still cannot change with the knowledge that a man will not enter.
Yeah. And what you really want is for these women, all the women on the ward, to simply to go into that room and say, "Get out! We're not putting up with this." But you know perfectly what would happen. Well, what would happen? Those women would lose their jobs.
Yeah, well, these nurses have been threatened with disciplinary action. Yeah. They're also saying that they feel it's stopped their career progression within the NHS because they've sort of been sidelined as being troublemakers for just saying perfectly reasonable things. Yeah. And you do have to wonder how prevalent this is in the NHS, because it seems as though these 5 nurses, they've got quite a good relationship. They've come together. They've supported each other to stand up to it. But how many women elsewhere, how many female staff in the NHS are experiencing this on their own, and they're not saying anything, and they don't have the maybe confidence to make a complaint or to seek out legal action. So it's
well, I would say probably many thousands, judging by the number of people who approach the Free Speech Union. I would say to everybody in this situation, this is happening in your workplace. By the way, I spoke to a man a few months ago. He raised it with me about his workplace where they have to change into uniforms, and he said to me that there's a guy who claims to be trans, but he's using the male changing room, but he's wearing sort of female underwear. And I mean, basically, I'm sorry, we're talking fetish at this point. A man is just, but they're not allowed to comment. They're told they need to wear their little badges with their pronouns on, and they've said we don't want to wear. I'm obviously a bloke. I'm a big bald bloke. Of course, I'm not a sodding woman. Everyone knows I'm a bloke. I don't need to wear a pronoun badge, thank you. And being told, well, if that's your attitude, you can't have this sort of transphobia. But then being forced to be in a changing room with someone who's parading his sexual fetish around by wearing, a bra. He's clearly a man. He doesn't need a bra. Women wear bras for a specific reason, And this stuff is just bizarre. But of all the places you'd expect biological reality to matter, it would be the NHS, because it's kind of crucial. But I think everyone, get in touch with the Free Speech Union and get in touch with Sex Matters, fantastic organisation protecting women, and they will be able to inform you what your legal rights are, because actually we've got a lot more legal rights than people say, and we all need to stand together on this stuff. Certainly, we would love to speak to any of the Darlington nurses. I know my production team have been in touch with them. We'd love to speak to them. Absolute heroes, and give them any help we can. But Amy, let's talk about something else as well, because again, this is all part of the madness. The capture of all our institutions, schools, the NHS, universities is where it started, and we imported it from America. But the University of Greenwich in southeast London has issued, this is ridiculous, they've issued an inclusive language guide to the 22,000 students, those who've arrived newly this term. Why anyone needs to be given a language guide? We have one of those. It's called English Dictionary. But they basically told students they should stop saying things like husband and wife, as the terms are non-inclusive. They don't include all relationships. Partner and spouse are approved alternatives. They shouldn't say, for instance, something is awfully good, because it could confuse foreign students who wouldn't understand. They should say preferred or legal name, not Christian name. This stuff is mad. But students feel that they need to play along with this stuff. The idea that husband and wife, or even things like mum and dad, that's been banned in some universities before, are somehow non-inclusive. Yeah, every word is non-inclusive, because by definition it means something, and therefore it doesn't mean something else. But this is insane.
Yeah, this stuff, it never ends, does it? It's always top down. It's never like some kind of student uprising against words like husband or wife. It's always some DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion officer, who's got loads of time on their hands. They actually work in probably an extremely diverse and inclusive environment. Most of London universities are very diverse and inclusive. So they've got...
No, they're diverse in terms of what people's ethnicity is, their sexuality is, and the colour of their madly dyed hair. They're not diverse in terms of opinion.
Exactly, yeah. So they've got, they don't know what to do with themselves. So they have to set about finding problems, basically. So actually, it's quite a good recommendation for our universities, that the worst problems that they can find are the uses of words like husband and wife. If that's the biggest problem there is, then we're doing pretty well, aren't we? And it is absurd that, most people would have to think, so, well, what even is wrong with that?
Yeah.
Most people don't even realise.
Yeah, no, exactly. But again, when I was at school, and I live, my mum and my stepfather had a father, but say if your mum and your parents come in, you're like, that covers it. But also, by the way, you're allowed to get married whether you're gay or straight. Now, that I was massively in favour of the law being changed so that the gay people could also get married. And I find it extraordinary. Then you still mustn't exclude people who haven't got married. Like, oh my God, they've chosen not to get married. It is quite bizarre that people worry about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, another term in this inclusive language guide that supposedly we're not supposed to use in this university is minority group. And the idea is that if you say the term minority group, it could make some people feel as though they're inferior, which I don't understand, because I thought the woke kind of politically correct brigade were all about minority groups.
Obsessed with it.
Exactly.
But also, you might be an ethnic minority in this country, but you won't be an ethnic minority, for instance, in the rest of the world, or, if you're in China or if you're in Nigeria. Because, you and I would be an ethnic minority in both of those countries. It would be a simple, democratic, factual statement, would it not? Maybe we should just stop judging people by these things. Funny that. Amy, always talking sense. Keep up the great work. Amy Gallagher.